Hey there, folks. I guess you've noticed that I've changed the banner on my page. I had some friends make that for me. It's simple, a little creep to it, but let me know what you think down below in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and all that good stuff. All right, let's get started with the story. We've been at this for days. Isn't it shriveling? Or looking bored, like it wants to move on? I ruffled my hair in frustration. Jones was patient in his replies, as usual. Well, it takes time. It doesn't give up that easily. I sighed. Jones sank down on the ottoman across from me. I know it's tough. You've been doing a lot these days. Irritation creased my brows. You don't have to therapize me. I know when you're trying to validate my emotions. Jones laughed. I'm serious though. You've been working a lot on your mental focus, on being mindful and purposeful. It's been a lot of dedicated hard work. Despite myself, I felt a tingle of achievement, but I continued to stare sulkily at him. I know what you're doing. You're highlighting my efforts, praising me to keep me motivated, to help me feel empowered and in control. You really shouldn't try to psychologize me, you know. But that's what I'm here for. Not psychologizing per se, but to help you with your mental state, your focus. I nodded begrudgingly. My own personal psychologist, one who was there for me 24/7. I could honestly see why Dave had made so much progress under Jones' care. Jones, who was Dave's hallucination, or so I thought. When Dave, an ex-client, had returned to request a session with me, I had feared that perhaps the therapist he had been seeing had not been a good match after all. But as it turned out, the therapist that he'd been seeing since he ended sessions with me more than a year ago was someone only he could see. Yes, he'd hallucinated a therapist complete with round-the-clock therapeutic services, and it somehow worked for him. He was in a good place, and he had come back to see me only because, according to Jones, there was something hanging around me, something that emanated sinister vibes, something that meant me harm. I was unconvinced, of course. It was an implausible, incredulous story. But then Jones materialized before me. You can read about that in my previous post. I won't go much into that now. So anyway, Jones and I had been working to try and rid myself of the being that was plaguing me. Apparently, it was feeding off of me, draining my life force, my energy. According to Jones, these beings also tend to implant terrible thoughts into their victims' minds, thoughts which could lead them to do horrible things. Jones had tried to shoo it out, whatever that entailed, but apparently he had been unsuccessful. Now the next steps were for me to work on reinforcing my mind. According to Jones, that thing can most easily feed on my life force when I'm unfocused, unmotivated, and when my thoughts were scattered. Unfortunately, that was most of the time. Outside of my therapy sessions, after work hours, my brain usually went into a sluggish, vegetative state. All I could do would be to passively consume TV shows and podcasts. In the past months, I didn't even have the mental capacity to play video games, an activity I once loved. Being a psychologist can be intensely and extensively draining. I stood up and paced about. It's really here, this thing. It was Jones' turn to frown. You don't believe me? I shrugged noncommittally. Well, you're the only one who could see it. You claim it's there, and you hop on over from Dave to my consciousness to help me out. And we've been working on my thoughts, on my behaviors for hours every day, and it's all based solely on your word. He regarded me seriously. I felt a rumble of guilt, but I had to voice my doubts. My very reasonable doubts, I reminded myself. For all I knew, he could be some demon spawn. He didn't respond. In the awkward silence, I spilt out yet more doubts. You really helped Dave to get to a better headspace. You did amazing work with him, but, well, before you appeared to him, did he have any issues? Was he already in a bad state? Sadness tugged at the corners of his lips. He took a deep breath, as if steadying himself to share something difficult. I appeared to him for a reason. I watched him intently, silent. Some people in your world, they're more sensitive. They're more in tune with other beings from other worlds. Dave, he's really sensitive, and his mind happened to be rather attuned to my world. Well, there are things in my world that intend harm to those in your world. For people on your side who happen to be more sensitive, more in tune, these things can affect them. They may not be visible to these people, but they can definitely affect them. And when people are in a bad headspace, their lives are chaotic, they tend to be more vulnerable to these influences. He must have noticed my arched eyebrows. I know it's hard to accept, but honestly, haven't you ever considered the existence of other worlds? Other beings your world isn't aware of? Like when your clients talk to you about things they saw, voices in their heads, didn't you ever wonder if it could be real? If it could be that they're communicating with things, beings that you didn't know about? I have considered that, I admitted, but that has no science behind it. Not yet, at least, and I operate based on science. I left out the part that I happen to be a huge conspiracy theorist, but I guess I just had to see for myself. I gestured vaguely at Jones. Jones smiled. Yes, you actually handled my appearance better than I expected. I gave a wry smile. Anyway, so how did you end up in Dave's life? He cleared his throat. Well, back then, I had seen Dave. I could tell that he was sensitive to our world, and he was in a dark place. There were beings from my side that didn't help matters. They fed off him. He was lucky in that these were simple, easily handled types of beings. I fended them off as much as I could, but he was keeping himself open to more that came along. So He paused, looking a little anxious. So you... I made myself visible to him. I could see the mixed emotion in his eyes, the slight furrow of his brows. I waited quietly for him to continue. He freaked out. I could tell he thought he'd finally broke. I really feel bad about his initial mental meltdown. I mean, I tried to be as tactful as possible in approaching him, but I guess people from your side really don't do well with seeing us. Well, he got into a load of trouble because of me, and eventually he was asked to see you for therapy. I kept trying and trying to reach out to him, to let him know that I was only there to help. I wanted to help him out of his dark space. I wanted to make up for his mental breakdown. And the rest, well, you know. I leaned back in my seat and closed my eyes, trying to digest the mind-boggling information he just shared. It was a good minute before I could get my mind right. Are you saying that mental illnesses are all caused by creatures from other worlds? Jones flinched at the word creatures. We're not all creatures, and no, mental illnesses are mental illnesses. Most of your clients have just that, a psychological disorder. It's not common to be sensitive to other worlds. It's not common to have issues like Dave did, like you do. But yes, a small proportion of those who are diagnosed with mental disorders are, in actual fact, dealing with otherworldly issues. I nodded, relieved that I wouldn't have to revise all my clients' notes. It made sense, too, that people with these otherworldly issues would be misdiagnosed with mental illnesses. When Dave came to me, he had already had a diagnosis slapped on him by his psychiatrist. I had taken a look at his notes, matched it to the diagnostic criteria, and thought no further of the matter. Actually, why didn't you just disappear again when Dave was freaked out? It doesn't work like that. Once I made myself visible to him, he was kind of keyed in to my wavelength. Something like that. It's like opening a can of chips. You can't unopen it after that. I mean, you could, technically, if you sealed it or something, but, well, okay, it's more like if you bit into a cookie, you can't really unbite it. I mean, unless you haven't chewed, then technically you could. You mean once you see it, you can't unsee it? Like once you know something, you can't unknow it? Ah, yes, that's much better. That's what I meant. I nodded, chewing on the inside of my cheek. Am I sensitive too? I asked. Well, there's that thing hanging about you, so that should already tell you something. I rubbed my face with my hands. Will I be able to see that thing? The creature, the being, the thing with me? Jones shrugged. Maybe if you got more in tune with it, otherwise, it would really have to decide to show itself to you. Where is it now? I had a sinking feeling that I knew. Jones seemed reluctant to tell me. Finally shifting about uncomfortably, he said, Well, it's still on your shoulder. I gave an involuntary shudder. I was right. I suddenly had the urge to start flicking at my shoulder, whacking it, running about the room, sweeping at it. I forced myself to remain still. Okay, great. I cleared my throat. I had guessed, so actually, I'm starting to sense it. This eerie, ominous feeling I get from it, just hovering about. It twists me up inside. I think maybe I might have already become more attuned to it since you told me about it, so yes, wonderful news. What do I do now? Well, it's not one of those simple creatures. This one's complex. It seems to be a proper sentient creature. I can't really tell what it is. It's probably not willing to show itself clearly to me. So I'd suggest for now to just really keep working on keeping your mind focused and clear. Engage yourself in whatever you do. Be focused on just where you're at, what you're doing in the moment. Keep doing that, and it should, hypothetically, help to lessen its ability to affect you. Hypothetically? Great. Okay, so practice mindfulness. Practice mindfulness to get rid of an otherworldly creature that's clung on to me, right? I know it sounds strange, but it's really all I can think of that would work right now. I just looked at him for a long while, then I sighed in resignation. Whatever works, I guess. It's not like I have a choice. That night, Jones went off to check on Dave. Dave had come in a few days ago for his follow-up session, and he had been more than delighted to realize that I had seen Jones too. I think deep down, part of him had harbored lingering doubts about Jones. He probably wondered from time to time if other people like me, had been right, and that Jones was just a hallucination. The pure relief and joy on his face showed just how much it meant to him that I could see Jones too. Dave had seemed to be coping well, but it had been quite a while since Jones had left his side, and Jones was anxious to check up on him. He seemed almost like a concerned father figure, though they were probably more like brothers in terms of age. Then again, Jones could be 1,000 years old, for all I knew. Left alone for the first time in a week, I felt a sense of relief and freedom, but at the same time, I couldn't deny the faint sense of emptiness that crept upon me. I had quickly gotten used to Jones' company. It was finally sinking in just how good of a person Dave was to be willing to part with Jones for my sake. after having had Jones with him for such a long time. I practiced some mindful meditation and did my best to keep my thoughts centered on my breath, on the here and now. But it was tough, sensing that somewhere close by, that thing was there, watching me. I decided on an early night, after washing up and turning the lights off, I snuggled under the comfort of my covers. I had popped a sleeping supplement before bed. I had an early session tomorrow, and I needed to be able to fall asleep soon. I lay still for a while, but the kink in my neck was bothering me. I flipped over onto my side to ease the tension in my neck. I was getting drowsy when I sensed it move. It was right in front of me. Chest tight, throat constricted, I slowly opened my eyes. A paralyzing fear enveloped me. I couldn't scream. All I could do was continue to stare at it, unmoving. A mess of dark, grayish limbs, tangles of wild, messy hair, a pale, empty face with waxy skin, black eyes, completely black eyes, the whites nowhere to be seen, and his mouth contorted into a crooked smile. "You wanted to see me?"